Very few founders embrace sex, drugs, and rock and roll the way that Tanya Griffin has. It's led to a successful career launching numerous dispensaries, business models, and even several CPG products in both the cannabis and hemp space. In this episode, we dive into what has made that so special, how to get better orgasms through data and cannabis, and you get to explore the journey that we've come together. Tanya gave me my start back in the cannabis industry back in 2015, giving me the opportunity to manage a dispensary, and it kind of launched from there. My career just took off, and I have a lot to thank for Tanya. This is a really fun episode, and enjoy.
So let's go. What do you want to talk about? Do you ask me questions, or how do you want to do it? I mean, obviously, you and I go way back.
Yes. Yeah, you were actually the person that helped me get into the cannabis industry way back in 2015, 2016, which is like forever now.
20. You know what? It was 2015, wasn't it?
Yeah, way back then.
Felix and I lived across the street from each other.
Yeah, way back, family, friends from back in the suburbs, and then
back in the suburbs.
Yeah, then when I was down there in Normal, I saw that you were opening up the dispensary down there, and just kind of made sense to reach out. And yeah, since like day -1 essentially, like they're at the store.
Exactly, that's right. Yeah, so we both, and then you worked with Andrew, my brother, at the Green Solution. And then, so what was your journey? Because I stepped out of retail. Andrew ran those 4 stores for years before he came back over to Water and Trees, my company. So when did you kind of step out of the Green Solution and make your way into the other stuff?
That was in 2017 when I graduated from ISU with my the crop and soil science degree. Went there and joined Columbia Care. Was there on their I was originally hired to be their assistant grower for this facility out in Aurora, but then they had like all the litigation issues, as one does in the cannabis industry. So their facility didn't open up till much later, and so since I had the dispensary experience, I went and just helped manage their Jefferson Park dispensary location. Then I just kind of worked my way up there. Since I was one of the few medical patients that had my card back then, I was able to try a lot of the products. So then it led me very naturally into doing all the inventory for it. And then once we launched our cultivation center, I was out there helping, and then I helped launch their wholesale program from Columbia Care. So I launched all their flagship brands, Seed and Strain, 777, Classics, all those ones, the Tyson 2.0 back in the day.
Right, forgot about that.
Yeah, launched all those ones, and then joined the Ascend team for a little while on their wholesale team. And then I joined the Bettering Company for an edible startup. I was their director of sales. That was a good little run. And then had the opportunity with C-Cell and joined C-Cell. So just kind of seeing a little bit of like little bit of the industry, kind of worked almost every position, back of house, front of house, cultivation, a little bit of everything.
Well, I must say, I feel like it's kind of the only way to do it. The cannabis ride over this last decade, which is what we're talking about here, has been quite the roller coaster. It's been a bumpy ride. I would say, especially, I've been in it since 2012, and never have I seen quite the journey we've had in this last couple of years. You know, I mean, it's always been a ride, but we were living on that pipe dream for so long. And so to my exits, we're all still in that 30, 40, times EBITDA range. It was all built on romanticizing the industry. And the reality of our industry is that we're overly regulated, we're overly taxed. The margins and the net, profits at the end of the day are harder and harder to come by, especially if you're a small mom and pop trying to fight your way through overtaxation and overregulation up against multi-state operators that have a different infrastructure than you can if you're a one-off or a two-off or even five stores. So it's certainly been a journey. We both have had a journey, and I straddle not only do I straddle sex and drugs with oOYes, and we can talk about oOYes, my ecstatic sex brand, but my core company, my growth management marketing agency, Water and Trees, which has been around since 2007, I started in Chicago building healthcare companies, compound pharmacies, a surgical center in Pilsen. Like, Felix, I literally, when I got fully in bed with the Green Solution and became an owner of that and started building the Green Solution, I was like literally sitting in a surgical center in Pilsen that I was building, reading an article about Lou Lang. I mean, this is going back 13, 14 years, and medical cannabis coming to Illinois. And you know yourself, we lived across the street. We lived on the other side of the tracks in Western Springs, essentially. And, at the time I was married to a, pot smoking guitar player, and the whole cannabis, drug, because I had, as you know, I have 4 kids. One of them is almost your age, was made so much sense to me. I come from a family of Irish Catholic alcoholics, most of them, just ripping through life and just leaving just a destructive path, full destructive path in their wake. So the whole concept of cannabis, a drug that you don't overdose on, that just makes you wake up and feel great in the morning, just everything about it. As a newer user back then, because I had 4 young kids, I wasn't token up in the basement. I was like working like a crazy person. From a just a business standpoint, which is, I would argue, how I entered the industry. I entered the industry, not out of Humboldt, California, or a legacy grower, anything like that. I did it coming in as I would run any company, whether it was, my retail stores back in 1995, or my brands, or restaurants that I owned. Cannabis to me followed that same journey in running a business, albeit a lot more difficult. So it was like a restaurant, Felix, on steroids, right? Really, it was. Restaurant business was already difficult with a pretty high failure rate. And I had owned a couple of different restaurants and an organic cafe prior to dipping into the cannabis industry. And wow, was cannabis an awakening. One of the things that I love about cannabis is back in the day, and it changed so dramatically, fast forward 10 years, but back in the day, it was a restrictive environment. So it was hard to operate. Therefore, it kept a lot of other people out. Which was, always an advantage. If you're the one figuring it out, if you're first to market, it's certainly an advantage. But then as we jumped forward 10 years, we saw everything falling in on itself. Right? We saw all of the pipe dreams and the romanticizing of our industry collapse under the weight of all of us who got in it kind of not understanding the journey. And this is what I mean by that, Felix. There's a book, I don't know if you've ever read the book Freakonomics.
Oh yeah.
So in his original book, I think he's got a podcast now, but in the original book, he's doing his doctorate at University of Chicago. Cabrini Green is a stone's throw away. And what's so interesting about that, and what we can reflect on in our industry, is that he went and looked at really what it meant to be a drug dealer. So you could be the guy driving around in the Benz with the gold chains, but there's only one of those guys. Everybody else is working for less than minimum wage in a very high risk industry. And I think what's interesting about the cannabis industry is, early days at our dispensaries in Illinois, I hired you were phenomenal, but we were hiring master's degrees, teachers, all of these individuals that were running from their own industries, thinking that there was a pot of gold and that they could work their way up in the cannabis industry. And again, that fast forward button, but moving forward 10 years, the awakening and the shock and the sort of the dismay in the industry of, wait, what am I doing here? Am I working a retail job, or am I moving up the ladder and making a difference in this industry? I mean, what are your thoughts on that, right? Am I summarizing that right?
Definitely, and I think there was a lot of false promises in the beginning, especially on the retail side.
Right.
Because in the beginning they weren't vertically integrated. Now most dispensaries in Illinois like have some kind of vertical integration or partnership. But in the beginning, when you were a standalone dispensary and you're promising this great career path, it's like maybe if you're the GM of the dispensary, you have a decent career, like a career kind of thing like that. But everything else is just kind of regular retail jobs, and
Right.
there's not much opportunity unless your boss gets fired or quits, and you get promoted to their position. And then from like an operator standpoint, it makes sense because you're not just gonna randomly make up new positions for people and like, oh, you're the super duper lead now. It's like, it's like,
Really, the super duper lead?
yeah. And so there's a kind of like a reality of retail. I think that like needs to kind of be addressed with cannabis. But now that there is opportunities like joining, like starting at a store level, becoming a manager, going on to like a corporate team, and then like kind of like working that way, I think there are more career paths. But saying that like, oh, a bud tender is like, once you become a bud tender you're set, like it's like, no, it's an entry level
Right, you're going to
position.
be driving the Benz in no time, which the reality is that's not the case. Now, how you did it, Felix, the cream always rises to the top, and you are obviously the cream. But what I have noticed in the industry, even with our bud tenders at Snap Canna, is those few people that came in as the rock stars and were always the leaders inevitably left the bud tender position
Yep.
and were a sales rep for Stizzy or 1906 or whatever that company is. They took a lateral path outside of that bud tender role to
Yep.
make a difference in the industry, and we'll see where it all falls out. I after my exit from selling the dispensaries in Illinois, we were still in the bubble, Felix. So it was 2020, pre-COVID,
Yep.
and the 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 VCs were still in it. They were still throwing money, based on a piece of paper of nonsense, based on like pipe dreams again
Yep.
and ideas. And I was coming into that, and just all I could think, and in my headspace was double down. Like, this industry, it still is intoxicating, not in the sense that you're getting high, but intoxicating in the sense that we who love the plant love the whole magic of the industry. Like, we understand it's how it contradicts the negative attributes of alcohol, how it shows up as a drug to get you high but doesn't kill you.
Yep.
All of those things are, we lived them, and we believed in it. I'm going to tell you about my journey, which you already know, but when I had my exit, I threw everything into two real companies, two CPG brands, which should scare anyone. One, of course, was my absolute love of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So that was, that I could not look away from. And so, oOYes, so oOYes, is my ecstatic sex brand. And it took me, Felix, 3 years to migrate back into the THC side of the business. So I immediately, faced with the prospect of going back into dispensaries, which have relatively small net profits at the end of the day, because it's highly regulated and overtaxed, as we discussed. I took my journey into the hemp side, 10 different products, all designed to help dial in, orgasms for under $25. But I built a sex quiz where you say, oh yes, oh no, oh maybe so, to 100 different sex acts, but more importantly, just another way of helping people show up and stay present for sex, like open communication.
Yep.
So for me, cannabis was as much about the experience as it was some product that gets you high. So Going Down is our oral sex elixir. Yeah, it's got a kick of THC. Yeah, you put it on your private parts, it gets you high while you're having sex. But also, it's called Going Down, oral sex elixir. So it kind of gives you a roadmap for showing up and staying present, which is, kind of in sync with all of the products. Now, having said all that, I have not, in the handcuffs, we do upcycle bicycle handcuffs.
Nice.
I collect bicycle tubing all over Colorado, and we make handcuffs and floggers out of it, and 10 other products. So let's talk about the journey back into dispensaries, which is so interesting, right? Because you can sell direct to consumer, but adding THC to that obviously means that we have to stay within the regulatory process of those states. So we're in Illinois. We're in over 130 dispensaries in Illinois with the lubes and elixirs. So Going Down, which is oral sex elixir, Roll Baby Roll is a roll-on sex oil, and Start Me Up, which is a water-based lickable lube.
Oh, nice.
So those all get you. It is literally edible sex play. So when you go into a dispensary and you're navigating the online ordering or the POS, we should not be found under tinctures. We should be under edibles, because it's all designed to be licked, drizzled, dripped, eaten off each other, essentially. So next, coming down the pipeline in Illinois, and we're dropping in Missouri next week. So the lubes and elixirs are, my partner there is Clover, and in Illinois it's Nature's Grace, both amazing partners. So coming in after the lubes and the elixirs, we've got the Be Wild Tantric Honey, where that's our other company, Honey. So that, if you want to geek out about bees and cannabis, you can go look at honey.com and watch our bees. Literally, we feed them an RSO rich nectar of either hemp or THC. The bees eat it, and they choose to eat it because they're free range on an organic farm in Santa Maria, California. And we end up with a single ingredient, raw honey, where the bees are our extractors, which is pretty cool. So the end result of that is, on your certificate of analysis or COA, our honey travels, whether it gets you super high and we fed them THC or we fed them hemp, it travels always under 0.03 THC.
That's
so
wild.
In compliance with the Farm Act. So that's the honey. I'll
That's
tell you about
very
our
cool.
other couple products that are coming through the dispensary. We've got Trippin', which is our single-use, single packet product that is the bee-fused honey. And then I formulated with beta-caryophyllene. So if you're having a bad trip, and this is for individuals who get a little freaked out either with cannabis or by extension classical psychedelics like MDMA or LSD or psilocybin, it's that beta-caryophyllene, particularly to cannabis, that can take you down and get you back into that sweet spot off of that sort of the floor is moving moment. For example, sugar does that with psychedelics, but peppercorns or beta-caryophyllene is instrumental in doing that for new users who are heading down that road and hit a wall fast.
Yeah, that's important.
And we've got another one called Natural Woman, which is a tincture with the bee-fused honey, beta-caryophyllene, and all the terpenes, that is a sublingual, so that you can, when you get old, like me, and you're, faced with your ovaries no longer producing estrogen, it's important to take and acknowledge that alternative applications, say an edible doesn't have as well of an uptake if you have low estrogen than a sublingual does, for example.
Interesting.
Did you know that?
No,
The science
learning
behind that?
something new every
So
day.
yes, I'll tell you about it. It's estrogen is not a female hormone exclusively. Men and women both have estrogen, but women cycle. So that means they ovulate and then they go through, then they have a period. And when they're ovulating, their estrogen is super high. They're more likely for that estrogen to go pick up THC at the CB2 receptors. So they get high more easily, just as easily. When you stop producing estrogen, your ability to get high also changes because estrogen is no longer meeting THC at the CB2 receptors. And if you want to navigate that in a way that continues to get you high, or you're able to dial in that high, acknowledging those changes in hormones and how you apply cannabis to that situation, whether it's an edible, a sublingual tincture, dabbing, a bong, or a pre-roll, all changes with that fluctuation in hormones.
That's pretty cool.
Is that cool? Yeah.
Yeah, it also makes sense why sometimes in the dispensary you'd hear people that were a little bit older being like, these edibles aren't working all of a sudden,
That's
both
exactly
male
right.
and female, and just like I have to take more, or like it only works. Yeah, that's very interesting.
Well, that's directly affecting. I mean, that directly is men and women, mind you, are directly affected by those fluctuations. And remember, women obviously have testosterone.
Hmm.
Testosterone converts to estrogen. What happens is you get older and you either hit menopause, or as a male, you're not hitting menopause, but your hormones, your testosterone levels are dropping, your estrogen levels are changing, and that's going to directly affect your ability to get high. What's interesting is that a sublingual tincture, applied to the mucous membranes in your mouth, or if you're using it for sex play, obviously your private parts, hits the bloodstream very, very quickly. Unlike an edible, which you know everything about edibles at this point from the Veteran Company, but
Yep.
unlike an edible, which has to make its way through the liver, through the digestive system, made to have an uptake of 20 to 30 minutes. But because it's now having to dance with estrogen in a different way in the bloodstream, it doesn't get you hot in the same way anymore.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I've been, to that end, I have been seriously fascinated with the tech side of cannabis. I spent almost 10 years building reg tech and fintech software when I had to step away from the green solution for a couple of years. And I had a non-compete that didn't allow me to touch the plant for 2 years, which is a long time if that's your sort of bread and butter. So I built reg tech software and was COO of a Chicago fintech, which is basically a banking solution. So that whole idea of UX, UI design, and building a solution that helps consumers figure out a better path to either dialing in their high, or in the case what I'm building with WeFlowYo, it's really about how do you track and dial in dosing at that very unique intersection. And for me, the intersection is hormones. So that can be judged by your temperature, where you're at in your cycle, if you're a female, but also coordinating the intersection of the drugs that you're taking. That could be estrogen in hormone therapy, testosterone in hormone therapy, birth control, SSRIs, Adderall, like all of these drugs that we throw into our body. If you're able to acknowledge them and track them and intersect them with your hormones, and then of course, the third intersecting point for me, Felix, is obviously sex. So everything I do is around dialing in better orgasms. So if you can track where you're at in your cycle, but all relative to the drugs you're taking. So whether that's the application of cannabis and at what dose and how slow and how you dial in, or by extensions, MDMA, classical psychedelics, like psilocybin or LSD.
Yeah.
All of those dance with hormones and have a result into the activities that you do, that if you learn how to dial those in and really, really track them, it can blow your mind how good that can get, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, that's like once you have the data, like with most things, you can start to actually dial it in and actually make educated, guesses and educated, presumptions.
Yeah, especially when it's your own data. You know
Yep.
what I mean? Like I use, for example, I have an Aura ring, and you can take that biometric data and export it and kind of link in those other factors that I was telling you, the drugs that you're on, all of them, and the activities that you do. It could be sex, yoga, running, whatever
Oh
that
yeah.
is. But what you learn from that is how to interact with those drugs. I'll give you an example if you have any listeners who are my age, and how I have spent, a couple of years now tracking and really dialing in that information. Um, I think my ovaries, by the way, are done. I have 6 kids. They're all 23 through 31, so they're getting older. So what I do is I dose myself with a milligram of estrogen, in conjunction with whatever drugs I'm taking. So the uptake for those drugs, whether it's cannabis or, because I live in Colorado, classical psychedelics are, also available to me. The difference in the uptake of those drugs is directly tied to how I'm interacting with those hormones.
Oh yeah.
That's stuff that we've really got to dial in. And as we progress as an industry, we're just going to get smarter and smarter about the doses that we're using. And it's often a lower dose than you think
Yep.
to get that desired sweet spot. But as it stands right now, the industry is started in such a fledgling way, and we race to the finish line so quickly that we're all about high dose at this point.
Yeah.
If it's a flower, whatever it is, it's more the merrier, which is not always the case.
No, and I think that the consumers, I think they ultimately know that THC percentage and the highest one isn't always the best, but it's the only number that they have to compare against, and it's only the only number that they compare like dollars to this. And then it's like if you're not, since we don't have like the opportunities to market and brand like traditional ones like CPG companies, it becomes down to like what do they see on like the menu screen, and they see like a picture and then they see price and they see milligrams, and so all brands are competing on price per milligram. It makes sense, like if alcohol was only, but then you look at alcohol, like no one's buying Everclear, right? And if like
Great.
and so like if anyone
Right.
if that was the only metric that mattered, Everclear would be on all the shelves, and like wine would make nothing, right? And but in the opposite is like no, nobody actually likes drinking that. People actually stay away from that as much as they can. They like their wines and their low ABVs, and now like no alcohol things are even more popular.
Yeah. Well, because you're just deep in it every day, are you finding that some of these brands are gaining traction, to your point, around the experience? So if we compare it to alcohol, Jim Beam versus, so if you're in a particular whiskey and you love that whiskey, or Tullamore Dew or whatever that is,
Yep.
where are we at in the cannabis journey where we're finally able to dial in those craft experiences where it's not an Everclear?
I think it's getting close. There's
That's great,
especially in certain markets, like much more developed markets, and where there's more heady people that own brands. So like more Michigans, the Colorados, California, Arizonas. Like you see people that are like more of the culture, kind of like representing in dispensaries. Where here in Illinois, like the headiest of people that buy, that are willing to pay $90 for a gram of rosin, are never going to buy that $90 gram of rosin from the dispensary because it doesn't meet their quality, kind of thing like that.
That's interesting.
There's a couple brands that are
right.
they're dropping those ones, and they're slowly gaining traction. Like I'm thinking like Icy Collective here in Illinois, they're dropping hash holes, like, so like 2 gram joints with a gram or half gram of like rosin in the middle of it. And they retail for a fair amount, but they're a really good craft product. And then those ones have almost like a cult following. They know the guy
Yeah.
who rolls them, and like when they drop at certain stores, they sell out because it's, they only drop 100 per store or something like that, and someone like 10 people will each go in and buy 10.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that like that's going, but that's a small, half of a percentage of sales, if that. And most people are just going in being like, okay, what 100 milligram edible can I buy for under $20? Oh, that one's.
Well, you're right. It's a price thing, and I think that dialed in kind of from the gummy or the edible world, dialed in kind of
Oh yeah.
laid the groundwork in that in a very similar way, tied it to a strain, kept it so that it wasn't really readily available. So if you weren't in that dispensary in the morning to buy it, you were just out of luck. Like
Yep.
you had to, shift it over to one or buy something else. Or so I think we're gonna slowly move. One of the challenges that I see though in the industry is from a buying standpoint. So the GM has to make all of these decisions, and there's always the 80-20 rule. So the majority of your consumers are coming in because it's their weekly fix. They're on a very set budget, and people are just not throwing money around to buy these things. So those, the high end 30-year-old whiskey is definitely not moving.
Yeah.
And so it makes it harder for the to keep that inventory sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. It makes it like hard to justify as well. And then if it's not even where alcohol like is, they're in a very lucky position where it doesn't expire, and so like a 30-year-old bottle can just sit on the shelf and actually get better and better. Where cannabis has like as soon as like it's done trimming or as soon as it's done extracting, like the expiration clock is going. Uh,
That's so true.
and so like if it's just sitting around, then it's like hard to justify having on your menu. And yeah, it's just kind of like it's like, well, we sold 5 of those this month and we sold 500 of these. Like why are we putting so much money or time and effort into marketing these 5 units versus like let's just see if we can get a better deal on these 500.
Right. I think that's 100% the case. And then to further add, make that a challenge, the bigger players, the multi-state operators that are either vertical integrated or have really bought into shelf space all over the place. So you're sort of compelled to spend 30 to 40% of your shelf space with a particular vendor.
Yep.
They're not necessarily dancing in the craft space. I mean, that's the littler guys who just got these licenses and are finding, obviously, that the margins, even to do the small craft, high-end rosin, is a dance, like,
Yeah.
and not an easy one to keep going. And the expiration dates notwithstanding, it's just, how do you break through the noise, even with the bud tenders, to get them to, when the high roller comes in, how do you make that connection where he's saying, listen, yeah, I know you see all this high THC rosin and stuff, but this is the guy, this is the caviar, this is the one you need. And even that conversation in a world where 60 to 65% of our ordering has shifted to online ordering. So those purchasing decisions are not in communication with a bud tender like they used to be. Don't you agree? Or it's obvious an iPad now.
Yeah, it's when I go into stores now, I like just don't like back when I was more of like a selling product, I would go in there and purposely try to talk to bud tenders, like buy a pre-roll or buy a single edible or something like that. I didn't need the edible; it was more just for the interaction. But I was so often like I go up to the counter and the first questions were, "Do you have an order?" And I was like, "No, but I want to talk to you." And they're like, "Oh, can you go to the screen and place it? Then you can come over here and pay for it." I was like, can't you place, like, I'm here to talk to you, not an iPad. And then then some stores were like, oh yeah, I can help you, but yeah, like that, gone are the days where like you every single customer coming in, your first questions are like, well, how do you want to feel today, or what goals do you have for your purchase, those are like,
Well, it's you're making such a good point, because it is early days in the industry, even in Illinois. I mean, Andrew, when he trained you, when he ran those stores, it was, of course, they started medical, and it was always about that touch point, and about, and there's that potential to sell you dessert and teach you about the industry. And that has absolutely gone to the wayside. I mean, my company, Water and Trees, we continue to build, retail is our sweet spot, and we continue to build dispensaries and lounges. And I got to tell you, Felix, we have circled back. So, for a hot minute there, even with Snap Canna, which we built, I named it Snap Canna. I built it around this convenience, online ordering. We plumbed it for a drive-through, hoping at one point it would come together. But the whole shift in the market around pull up in front, get in and out in 5 minutes became where the industry had trended. And it became important to customers to not have that friction, to get in and out, online ordering. Now we're 10 years out. The dispensaries we're building now and that we have designed have come full circle back to that bud tender interaction, because what I have seen in our numbers and when we watch the retail side from the inside out is that we're not seeing the higher average ticket sales. They're not buying going down or roll baby roll, because there's never that interaction. The customer is running in to pick up an express order. If they do talk to a bud tender, it's almost like, come on, lay off, dude. It's not that friendly, we're gonna sit and rap about the industry. It's just not how it is. So now that they have allowed in the state of Illinois, just speaking very specifically to Illinois, more of the bodega sort of interaction. So now we can sell you a bag of chips and some pop, and really connect where you're headed, which is home to eat a bag of chips and some pop and play some games, right? Or watch some TV, or I hope have some sex. So that that movement means one of where we have started building stores is stopping putting the big kiosk and the big iPad so that your interaction is on this big television and pushing buttons, or just walking around an essentially empty store. I mean, we're not deli style. We can't put product out. So you see a bunch of empty packages, mind you, that you see in every other store. So there's no new experience. It may be laid out different. What's consistent in the experience, if we can bring it home and bring it back, is the relationship with these awesome people, the bud tenders. That's what breathes life into our industry. I mean, it's the retail setting, and it's what everybody, you, Andrew, everybody we know started. It was to have that interaction and grow through these companies, but we've taken that away. And I think there's an argument that with the advent of consumption lounges and where dispensaries can go, that we can bring it back into the high-end wine shop. And the experience that you'd have at a craft restaurant, and stop selling Everclear. Stop.
Exactly.
It's gonna come, Felix. We gotta bring it home and bring that experience back in after years of going in the other direction, I think.
Agreed. I think that will you'll probably see a big bifurcation in stores, where it'll be like the McDonald's drive-throughs where it's exactly the same everywhere you go, or is it going to be like your your All Cheval burger, which is like a specialty place that people will wait hours for to eat a burger, right? They're both selling burgers, but it's a very different experience and different levels of experience.
It is going to be that. What's interesting is, how does the industry shift? We have new players coming in, but not a lot, in fairness. I mean, if we just focus on our little state of Illinois, and it's not a little state, but if we simply focus on Illinois, there's a handful of licenses still floating around that are going to get built out, and they can lean into these other experiences, the bodega. They can lean into a more bud tender focused experience outside of this fast, convenient way of doing things. but the FF&E, the infrastructure to build your experience around fast and furious takes a whole change that the industry, quite frankly, doesn't have the money right now to reinvest in.
No, exactly.
And they certainly aren't going to put more money into labor when they're in their minds, they're pulling out of labor. No pun intended with the sex stuff. But, we've really shifted to this other direction. In Illinois, we're upset with the security guards alone, much less having too many butt tenders on the floor.
Yeah.
So we've absolutely shifted our focus.
Yeah, and I think that's only natural as the industry kind of matures and grows, and it's not, and kind of like how your point, like having to wait two years for as a non-compete, like people don't want to wait 2 years. In any other industry, 2 years is not an issue because things aren't really changing that much. Maybe some new software, some new upgrades, but 2 years is like boom and bust, and growth and death for certain companies. And
it's a lifetime in our industry because it works in dog years. Clearly, and we've moved so fast. Felix, that 2 year, it was 18 months in fairness, but waiting that out when you have invested so much in an industry, and to complicate matters, you've entered an industry that has put a lot of stink on you. So I came out of healthcare working with psychiatric centers and cardiology and surgical centers. And then 5 years in cannabis, meaning going back into healthcare, was certainly problematic. I mean, I had to literally go into the banking side to solve the problem of removing cash at point of sale, because it was the only space where I could do some damage and build something without touching the plant directly. So it was a challenge. It was a good lesson to learn, but we do have a lot of stink on our industry. So those master degrees teachers that jumped out of their profession and decided to be a bud tender in the hopes of driving the Benz and wearing the gold had a wake-up call like the rest of us.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. So it's tricky. I mean, you and I, we're not going anywhere.
No.
We're in it to win it, for sure. But you got to be able to kind of the ability to pivot and which you have done through your entire career, but that ability to play heads up ball and to see the sky falling before it falls, whether it's the hemp industry that crashed in 17 and 18. I mean, literally, Felix, I had Water and Trees was still winning licenses and building things, but I got persuaded to go run a big hemp company that was doing water processing. And we were sitting in Denver, Colorado, and the regulations did not catch up to the hemp industry. So Colorado was contemplating putting hemp, which is a massive volume, under the metric system, which is basically RFID tags. It would have been a catastrophic blow. Yeah. Meanwhile, hemp is a seasonal. You have to harvest it and it's over, basically. And everybody across the country was harvesting at the same time. The time we had tolling agreements all the way from Oregon to New York, where we were, hitting the farms, baling, combining, and then shipping these bales full of, nitrous just to preserve them back to process them. Well, within months, seeing the writing on the wall, we had to run out of Colorado and go to Kentucky and set up shop again in Kentucky, just to show you, not only are you having to make such quick decisions around the regulations that are just moving and changing right in front of you, but the industry itself was changing. So when we were doing these tolling agreements, a kilo of CBD isolate was, at the very onset, you could get 20 grand. Then it dropped to about 10 grand a kilo. I mean, that's mind blowing. Within the year, it had dropped to 500 a kilo. So just contemplate that change for a second on the back of any industry, albeit hemp or THC. And then, got to talk about D8 and D9. I mean, we can't not talk about this wedge coming right in the middle of the industry between hemp and THC, which had no regulations, great lobbyists, contrary to our measly disenfranchised nonsense that we've got over on the THC side, but a consolidated group of guys going after the bottom dollar and protecting their money successfully. I would argue that I never went into that part of the business because Felix with oOYes, because I just, having grown up in the cannabis side of the industry and fighting the regulations, fighting medical and bringing in the epileptic kids and PTSD and just trying to make a point that medical cannabis was here to stay, and watching that journey and seeing the NIMBYs and everyone being so upset around cannabis, and then watching synthetics just creep up. Like, I watched the Farm Bill. I knew it was okay, but couldn't believe it wasn't going to be squashed.
Yeah.
And it didn't. I mean, it's here to stay, my friend.
It is one of those wild things.
What's going on?
Yeah, it is. And we've seen that just a shift, like talking to brands, like legal brands, how they're now having like parallel brands, both on the hemp side or D9 side or D8 side, non-dispensary and dispensary channels, essentially, right? They have like dual channels for like a lot of their brands. I think some of them are doing it just as a cash grab, and I think a lot of them are doing it to hedge their bets too.
Listen, you got to hedge your bets, and I'm going to hedge my bets. I mean, the analogy, I think, is the call when you're on the West Coast, like where I am, or by extension, really California. When you call those bigger players, are you calling for the legacy or the regulated market? I mean, that is the question out there.
Yep.
Likewise, here, whether you're 1906 or Keep Cola or myself, it's the same question. I mean, if I can take my product and send it to you in the mail, no questions asked, and I get you high, how do the dispensaries then compete with 47% extra taxes on their back and regulations that cost you a fortune? I mean, if you just look at this industry from the outside, and we have nobody able to look at anything right now, as you know, politically. I mean, I think our fearless leader just said we're going to lock up all the drug dealers now, and it's the death penalty, which seems fair, I mean, just as the train had fully left the station, Felix, just as we were all kind of being like, I am my own person. I can do a little psilocybin or, open the mind to different, open the doors of perception, essentially.
Yep.
And you feel like you've got some freedom to push back the shame and live into that world, which is a very healthy space relative to alcohol, some of the, other things.
Agreed.
But I don't know for there. Felix, I want to talk about something else, if you don't mind.
Go for it.
Because it's super relevant to Illinois, and I want to get the word out. So I started a nonprofit.
Nice.
Really got it going back early days with the Green Solution in 2014, where we were, it was always super important to me to protect everyone from overdose. So if we're going to talk freely about drugs, and I do, I'm a big fan of sex and drugs. Once I figured them out, I went in 100%. But if we're selling sex and drugs, or let's just say drugs, we also, I think, have an obligation to educate and protect individuals with that. So my non-for-profit is called Saved My Life. So if you go to savedmylife.org, and what we're able to do, so if you're listening and you're a bud tender or you own a dispensary, I will get you as much Narcan, which is essentially naloxone. Narcan, naloxone, is the nasal spray that brings you back from an overdose. So if you're at a party and someone says, have some MDMA, and it's in a little pressed pill and it's not MDMA and it happens to be fentanyl, you could be dead within the hour. So everyone should have Narcan with them.
Yep.
Everyone. And it's not that you're a junkie. It's not any of those things. Not that there's any judgment on anyone doing drugs. We should not be judging or shaming anyone for sex or drugs. Keep that to yourself. But what we should be doing is making sure that if my children are using it, at least they are educated enough to know that if somebody hands them what they think is a Xanax and it's not, that somebody in the room has some Narcan. And it's the difference, Felix, between life or death.
Oh, yeah.
So it's irresponsible for us not to give it out. So if you have any dispensaries that you know that want to hand out free Narcan, not only do we have vending cabinets that we can get you, but we will fill them with Narcan. You can give them away for free. If you have to go buy Narcan at CVS or Walgreens or anywhere else, you'll spend at least $75, and this is free. Yep. So that is my public service announcement.
That's
Seriously, it is important, and we love our drugs. I love my drugs, not only cannabis, but also psychedelics. But I'm going to do them responsibly. I'm going to dial them in. I'm going to track them. I'm going to do them with intention. And when you do that, Felix, mind-blowing, awesome. Conversely, if you end up in a bad place with a drug, you need to have a way to get out of that bad place.
Yep.
Whether that's Narcan or peppercorns or beta caryophyllene, if you go too far on a chocolate bar, right? Or on a psychedelic, if you got to dose yourself up with sugar to come back from the floor moving and the walls shifting.
Yep.
Those are all things that you need to know.
Definitely, I agree. We have 2 packages of Narcan in our household that we keep just in case. And then anytime we go to like a music festival, we always make sure to have that, like not necessarily just for us, but like you never know the people around you. And like to your point, like your experience isn't necessarily your own like personal, like through your own eyes experience. Like my experience is going to be hindered if I go to a festival and I see someone like overdosing and nothing I can do about it. Like that's not good, you know? So like being like in those situations where it's like, okay, I'm going to be a community member. I'm going to make sure like not only am I going to be safe for myself, but if somebody else needs help, I'll be in that position to be able to help them as well.
I think thank you for doing that, by the way. And I also travel with it. And it's not because, for me, it's never for me because I get great drugs, right? I got the hook me up for drugs. So it's not for me. My drugs are all tested and clean. It's for the other person who doesn't have access. And guess who doesn't have access to great drugs? Kids. Yep. Kids are getting the worst drugs. They're getting the cheapest street drugs. They don't have the good hook-me-ups. No. Those are the people that we should be protecting.
Yeah, exactly. And not limiting access to stuff that could help them, you know.
Right. Or just not feel like thinking like the old school way of the fear mongering. Like when I grew up, it was dare. It was a couple of eggs in a frying pan. This is your egg. This is your brain on drugs. So never did we come at it from the position of educating. The same thing with sex and abstinence. Yeah. It was, don't do it. You're going to get an STD, AIDS, pregnant. Don't do it. Your brain is going to implode. So when they lie to us, how else are we supposed to respond but to lean in and do those things? Because now we trust nothing. We trust no one. So there's got to be a better path. And it's got to start with protecting ourselves and our kids and educating them. And above all, stop shaming other people.
Yeah, exactly.
Stop.
Yeah, just like most things in life, it's not black or white, but it's in the gray area. And, you know, you just got to make sure to kind of embrace that.
I agree. And stop. I mean, religion is kind of dying out here, but it used to be a big thing when I was growing up. And just that pushing all that religious ideology onto another person and suffocating them. Not cool, man. Not cool at all.
Yeah.
Maybe we got to end on that note because stop the shame, people.
Agreed.
Go live your own life. Do you?
I totally. So if someone wants to get a hold of you, of oOYes or Water and Trees or Honey,
Yes.
how would they get it?
Honey.
Honey, yes.
Please, yeah, reach out to me. So if you're on LinkedIn, DM me there. Um, you can get me through any of my brands. Like, I'm so easily accessible for oOYes, which is just so fun. I write weekly articles and nothing light, like how to give a blowjob, how to use your lube. Like, we're digging into sex and drugs hardcore. So follow Yes Love on Instagram. If you're in our private little space, we can share all the gritty details about,
Nice.
yeah, how to give a blowjob, for example. You can get me pretty much anywhere. If you find me on LinkedIn and just throw me a DM, I am happy to talk with anyone. We're raising some money right now. So my companies are all self-funded, Felix.
Nice.
So we're about to go over the hump right now. In fact, on LinkedIn, I just threw out a teaser this morning on oOYes.
Nice.
And here's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for, the way I go into new THC states is all with strategic partners. And I've got such good ones so far. So in Illinois, Nature's Grace, they're so good.
Yes.
Clover in Missouri, Keep Cola and the boys. So I'm going into Nevada and New Jersey and Colorado and Florida with Brand House. But I'm always looking to expand those strategic partnership relationships. And over the last 15 years, I have made a lot of people a lot of money. So if anyone's interested in straddling sex and drugs, let's have a talk. We're raising a little bit of money to get over the hump, and it's all going to COGS and big digital marketing push, believe it or not.
Nice.
So
That's important.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, this has been great, Tanya. I've very enjoyed hearing everything and hearing about your new brands, and definitely have some interesting takes, which I fully support.
Yes. Let's get everybody some Narcan too. All right. No shame, people. Stop shaming your buddies. Thanks, Felix. So good to see you, by the way.
Likewise, definitely.